brought to you by Pennsylvania Non-Believer. And we have a little feedback there. Can we get that cleaned up? Okay, thank you. I'm Steve Neubauer. I'm here today with Dr. Robert Brown. And say something, Bob. Say hi.
Hello.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
And dastardly Doug Diggins is here again with us.
Pleased to meet you all.
We'd like to remind everybody that this is a live TV show. We'll be opening the phone lines in about 10 minutes to take calls. This is a program to talk about issues of church-state separation and things of items of interest to atheists and people who are interested in atheism or agnosticism or some other form of non-belief. We're not really interested in hearing any proselytizing. If you're going to call us and give us a lecture about Jesus Christ or give us some long drawn-out version of Christian mythology, we've heard it, you know, and we don't really need to hear it again. If you have a serious question or a comment, we'd like to hear it. First, I'd like to mention that we have challenges to our viewers that we issue. Is our sound okay? Okay. Are we all right? Are we okay? Okay. Our challenge to viewers that we give every month, prove any supernatural events in the Bible. If you have evidence that we can go and look at that would show that any of these supernatural events in the Bible actually occurred, call us and let us know. Prove any effects of prayer. We spoke about this the last time you were on, Bob. The claim is frequently made that prayer has some sort of effect on people. The person who is praying has an effect on the person who's being prayed for. And we know that is simply not true. I think there was just since we did our show, there was another study, a really big study out. I can't think who did it. It was wasn't the Mayo Clinic. Theirs was out a couple years ago that showed no effect. This was another even larger study, and it just slipped my mind that quickly. But prove that America was founded as a Christian nation. We hear this claim quite often, that America was founded as a Christian nation. We'd really like to hear the evidence. We just don't seem to get it. I mean, we hear that it's out there, but we don't hear what it is. If you have it, call it. Give us a call. We'd be glad to examine the evidence.
Verifiable evidence.
Anything that we can check. And of course, if we can't address the issue on this program, we will research it and we'll get back to you on our next program. Prove that abortion is more dangerous to women than giving birth. We often hear the anti-choice crowd, the anti-freedom crowd, as I call them, talking about how they're trying to save women from having abortions, from the medical and psychological dangers of having an abortion, but it's actually at least 10 times more dangerous to women to carry to term than to have a safe and legal abortion. We'd like to hear any evidence you might have to the contrary. And prove that marriage between gay people is in any way harmful to the marriage of any other people. We hear all this uproar over gay people getting married, and frankly, we don't understand it. We want to hear why gay people shouldn't be as miserable as everybody else in the country. So if you have any comments or questions along those lines, please give us a call in about 5 or 10 minutes when we get our phone set up. And in the meantime, Bob, you wanted to talk about evolution a little bit, I believe.
Yes. Just one thing, when you're talking about gay marriages, last night on the Daily Show, Rick Santorum was on the Daily Show with him, talking about how crucial heterosexual marriage is to our collective well-being. I thought it was kind of interesting. I thought it might be of interest to our viewers that to review some of the techniques that are used by creationists as this battle over whether evolution or intelligent design or both is taught in our biology classes, whether that's in Dover, Pennsylvania, or in Kansas, state of Kansas. Intelligent design is little more than creationism, even though its packaging is slicker. It is very well financed and it's politically advanced by religionists. You can see that in the Kansas and the Dover situation. Basically, it moves beyond the creation myth, the standard creation myth, but still has the common component of a supernatural being. And intelligent design proponents can accept, and many of them do, that the Earth is more than 6,000 years old, that all the species were not created in 6 days, and that species can change. The commonality between the standard old-time religious creation myth and intelligent design is that the intelligent design people claim that since some biological phenomena are so complex that they cannot be explained, therefore a designer or a creator must have made these very complex situations in nature. But we know that many phenomena that could not be explained in the past are now understood, and so it's reasonable to assume that what we do not understand today will most probably be understood in the future. And as they have done since the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species, religionists continue their attack on evolution in several ways, and I'll just want to enumerate a couple that I think are most, that might be of interest to our viewers. They take quotations out of context. They're constantly doing this, especially those of famous scientists, evolutionists, such as Stephen Jay Gould, Richard Dawkins, or even Darwin himself. As an example, there's this famous quote of the man who revolutionized biology, Charles Darwin. And I just want to read this quote because it's so interesting. Darwin said, quote, "To suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seem, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree," unquote. But they never admit that Darwin went on to make the case for a gradual evolution of the eye. Likewise, they never mention the differences in compositions, function, and degrees of sophistication of eyes in varying species that have been observed since Darwin proposed his theory. Dawkins, in one of his books, there's some 40 examples of different types of eyes constructed in different ways, some of which are more or less efficient than others. The other thing they do is they try to find a gap in the fossil record. And they say because there is a gap, evolution must not occur, and that only a designer or God could bring about such a thing about. But this has been the case so many times in history, and explanations have been found for phenomena that were previously unexplainable. It's totally illogical to say that because that gap is there, by default, a designer or God did it. An example might be the creationist claim that if we have a fossil, fossil A, and we have fossil C, and they are related, it is not proof of evolution because there's no fossil B. However, if we find fossil B that is intermediary between A and C, then they would ask the question, where is A prime and where is B prime, and so on. In other words, there will always be a gap, and thus evolution will never be legitimate in our eyes from the fossil record. They do this while disregarding the mountains of evidence from the geological record, genetic studies, and geographical distribution data. For some reason, acknowledging the truth of evolution terrorizes them. Why, I do not know, because there are many religious sects which accept evolution as fact. I don't know if the latest pope does or not, but certainly the one that just died did, and many other religious sects accept evolution as fact. The thing that I find most interesting about intelligent design proponents, though, is that they have no scientific studies or observations to substantiate their claims. They have only their observations of complex phenomena, which are presently not understood, to support their claim of a designer. There's no geological evidence, no geographic distribution evidence, no genetic evidence, or experimental evidence for intelligent design. There is no evidence that a designer or God is responsible for the way we evolve. Therefore, I submit that there's no chink in the armor of the evolutionary model to make questioning it valid, or to make scientists change their mind about how or why we evolve. In fact, the evidence for evolution becomes ever stronger over time. Intelligent design should be taught in a comparative religion course, or better still, a mythology class. And the children of Dover and Kansas will be better for it.
Thank you, Bob. It was a very good point about the filling the gaps.
Yeah.
That I think Michael Shermer is
Michael
the
Shermer did,
individual
yeah.
who pointed that out. If we have a species here and a species here, and there's nothing in between, and we find a species that's right in the middle, then the creationists say instead of one gap, now we have two, because we have one here and we have
That's
one
even
here.
worse.
So
Yeah,
it's you really, there's virtually no evidence. There's no amount there's literally a mountain of evidence out there now that evolution occurred, that species evolved from other life forms over billions of years.
And
There's no doubt about that.
That's right.
Science has no doubt about that. There are questions within science about the exact mechanisms of the change and the rate of change and so forth, but there is no doubt that it occurred. But you really, I think, and we spoke about this before.
Yeah.
You really have to go and be very dishonest. You have to continue to be dishonest if you're going to promote either intelligent design or creationism.
Yes.
Because there's really there's no reality involved in it.
And the reality that they often don't mention also is that a very few numbers of fossils are found over time, so that
there's very few animals.
that fossilize
right.
or that are fossilized, so that there are gaps there. But the other evidence that's there, the geographical data, the genetic data, all that other stuff is there, and each time something new comes in, it makes the theory stronger. It makes the fact of evolution stronger.
You know, I think a lot of people, they have a problem with is really it's a matter of time and the number of iterations that it would take to change a species, to evolve into something. And they really think of present-day terms, and they think, well, you know, it can't change, and they're thinking maybe thousands of years. But we're talking about, you know, millions and billions of years, and we're not talking about, oh, maybe a couple of thousand different combinations. We're talking about tens of billions of billions. So therefore, you know, evolution really is not so far-fetched.
It's not far-fetched at all.
No.
I mean, it's just a matter of looking at. You cannot believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old. I mean, there's just no.
Well, if you're going to believe that, you might as well believe it's 1 second old.
Yeah, right.
And we were just popped here
Yeah,
with memories of a past that never really existed. That's just as reasonable. And while we're on the subject, before we get to Doug's presentation, I'd just like to mention, while we're on the subject of evolution and Dover, we've been, over the last year or so, we've been asking William Buckingham of the Dover School Board, who's kind of been shooting his mouth off, or where he was until he was told to shut up, I suppose, about America as a Christian nation and the need to have some sort of creationist or intelligent design in the Dover schools to balance evolution as though mythology is a counterpoint to science.
You can vote on it.
Yeah, you can vote on it. Of course, then he turned around and he claimed in sworn depositions that allegedly he claimed in the sworn depositions that he said no such thing, even though both newspapers quoted him and he was shown on the local news reports saying it. He claimed he didn't say it. So we've been putting this up every now and then, asking William Buckingham to produce the missing evidence of America as a Christian nation. And unfortunately, according to the newspapers, Mr. Buckingham is packing his bags and moving to North Carolina.
A friendlier environment.
The friendlier environment, perhaps, I don't know, but he claims he can't tolerate the snow here, and that may be. The fact is, he's the one who started this whole uproar, and now that it's in full swing, he's kind of ducking out. And we have a little illustration here that kind of addresses this. Can we get a shot of that? There we go. Just back out just a little bit. There we go.
That's good.
And the title is Intelligent Resign. So I guess the idea of somebody resigning in this case might actually be intelligent in some ways. But there you see the little rat who's deserting the SS Dover School Board, and he's leaving people stranded, and he's happy to be deserting the ship. And he's saying, "Great job, guys, stay the course. Sorry I've got to run, but the weather here doesn't agree with me." And of course we can assume that the little rat is the one who was maybe chewing through the floorboards or kind of scuttled the ship. And now that it's going down with all aboard, he's jumping to safety, to a better climate. And of course we're not going to say who the rat is, but he knows who he is.
Wonderful.
And we'll hate to see William Buckingham go, because I mean you just can't rent a clown like that.
Yeah, it's hard
mean,
to
really.
get somebody that.
Okay, Doug, you had something you wanted to talk about?
Yes, really, it's not going to be very long at all. But I'm going to talk about epistemology. Well,
You
I know.
can't say that on TV. Doug.
I know. Well, it's not the theory of how many people that you've angered today, okay? What it is, it's basically the theory of knowledge. It is not so much the theory of what you know or the study of what you know, so much as it is the study of how you know what you know. So, what do you need to know something? If you say the word know, then we have to assume that knowledge means truth. I suppose that you can have philosophical arguments out there that, oh yes, you can know a lie, but for this discussion, let's say that knowing something is the truth, that knowing something has to be the truth. So what do we need to know something? Well, what we need is evidence. And that's the key issue here, is evidence and what constitutes evidence. Now, is belief, you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. Is belief the same as knowing something? And does knowing something justify belief in something? And also, can beliefs be false? Well, let's go to a little example. And let's say that this gentleman is going to walk up to the top of a 50-story building. And he says, you know, I know that the theory of gravity is just a theory. And I believe that if I jump off the top of that 50-story building, that I will not plummet to my death. Now, is this a true belief? Or is it a false belief? Well, it is a false belief. You say, well, it's obvious that if he jumps off the 50-story building, he's going to plummet to the ground below and he's going to die. So his belief is false. Now we say, the same gentleman, he jumps off the 50-story building, and by some miraculous event, not miracle, but some seemingly miraculous event, a strong wind comes up, catches his clothing, and supports him so he doesn't go hurtling into the concrete at 120 miles an hour. And he lands on the sidewalk totally uninjured. And he'll say, aha! See, my belief was true. No, his belief was not true. His belief was still false. Random accidents that support a false belief do not make it true. And I think that if we have belief that is, rather, if belief is not justified without knowing, and we also say is, what do we call unjustified belief? Well, it's called blind faith, okay? So what justifies knowing something? Well, it's got to be evidence. Now, getting back to gravity, we know that gravity exists by a preponderance of the evidence. This is knowledge. We know that gravity exists. We know what happens if we take something and we drop it. It's going to fall. There's no doubt about this, except maybe if you believe in parallel universes, stuff like that. But in this world, we know by experience and observation that something is going to fall. So by the same token, we say, what justifies a belief in God? What is the evidence for a belief in God? And of course, right away, people say, well, for one thing, the Bible. And then, of course, to me, the most silly explanation of it is, well, just look out your window. Look around. I mean, that shows you there is a God. No, it doesn't. It shows me that nature is evolving, and this is how everything came into being. It does not prove that there is God. So is the Bible a true evidence? Well, this is something that we're going to have to get into on another program. So we have to ask ourselves, is the Bible true evidence? And if the Bible is written by man, how reliable is it? And is it valuable and reliable evidence? Tune in again. Same back time, same back channel, and we'll answer some of these questions. Take care.
If you have a question or a comment for anything Dastardly Doug has just spoken about, or anything Dr. Brown or maybe that I've spoken of, give us a call. The phone number is there on the bottom of your screen. It's 846-5067. I'd just like to mention that it has been 1,797 days since we first appeared here in this very spot on camera, in front of the live cameras, and asked Jesus Christ to present himself in front of our live cameras and prove his existence. Somebody on our very first program made the comment that Jesus was here with us, even though we didn't want him to be here, or we didn't know he was here, or something to that effect. And we immediately suggested that he simply make himself visible and prove his existence. If he has to, God he doesn't have to worry about these locked doors. He can just dematerialize, and walk through and rematerialize on this side, or float down through the ceiling, or up from the floor, or whatever. And we'll be happy to acknowledge his existence. All he has to do is present himself, and of course he has never done so, and we don't expect him to do so.
The only thing I wonder about is, if he did appear on our television show here, would he be wearing a Rolex?
That's a good question. Why would God need to have any kind of watch?
Yeah.
Wouldn't he already know what time it is before he looked?
Kind of makes you wonder.
Well, there's one thing that interests me about some of the things you were saying there, Doug, and that is that what I call the virulence of blind faith. The preacher stands up in front of a group of people and says, these things will accrue to you, and most of what we pray for is stuff. We pray for health, we pray for money, we pray for all these things. And it will accrue to you if you have enough blind faith in, I guess, in him or his book or his doctrine. And I find that somewhat distressing that people would Because if it doesn't accrue to them, if good health, if a cure for their cancer doesn't occur, what does that say to them about their faith? What does that say to them about their religion? What does that say to them about what will happen when they die, as they will, let's say, if they have bad cancer? And so that whole concept of blind faith is different. It's different from faith that if you come up to a red light, the probability, if you're going to cross the street and your light, the light turns red for opposite perpendicular traffic, you have a certain amount of faith that everybody's going to stop. But there's no predictability to blind faith. There's no predictability to faith involved in praying for stuff. And so that's one of the things that we as scientists and as people of science and interested in these methods, we like to see statistical analyses that faith works in X percentage of patients or it doesn't or whatever. So I find that interesting and kind of sad for those people who believe that kind of stuff.
It kind of is a letdown.
I'd say it would be a big
too.
letdown if you're going to, yeah.
Well, if you're viewing it realistically, but I think some of these folks, they pray for things that they're going to get anyway, in many cases, in some cases. In other words, they pray that somebody's going to get a raise. Somebody who's working in the family will get a raise.
That's highly likely.
And it's
Will get a
likely that,
job.
well, maybe the person gets a raise every year in March or something. So they pray that they'll get a raise this year, and they do for the 10th year in a row, and it confirms that
Oh, yeah.
that their faith was justified because they prayed for something and it happened. Or, of course, a lot of people, you're a physician, Bob, you know this, many people, even with very serious illnesses, just get better.
Yes, that's true.
And whether they're prayed for or not, whether they're Christians or Muslims or atheists or whatever they are, it happened to my father. I mean, he was given 6 months to live. He had cancer all through him, and he lived another 30 years after that. So
Armstrong, the biker.
Lance Armstrong, who's I understand he's a non-believer, and he was I guess he had cancer in his brain throughout his body.
That's what's said. You always have to worry about whether the diagnosis was accurate or not when something like that happens. I think you have to be very careful that way about the diagnosis. But yeah, it's true. But I just wonder if someone's praying to increase their economic well-being, maybe by winning the lottery. What's the probability of that? It's
very low.
It's very, very remote.
But
remote.
every now and then,
somebody does.
If you have, this is kind of almost like an evolution debate, because if you have 100 million people praying to win the lottery, and one of them does, and he goes on television and he says, "Yes, I prayed to win the lottery and it works."
Lo and behold.
Well, okay, it works for 1 out of 100 million.
But there's no mention of how many people others who were praying who didn't win.
It didn't work for the other 99.99.
That's like the old Pat Robertson trick, as he says, he stands there and he says, there's somebody in the audience that has cancer of the colon or something, and you're going to find out about it, But he never says where they are or who they are or whatever. So maybe somebody in Cincinnati does have cancer of the colon. They say, "Yeah, I got it. Okay, what a great deal." And somebody who didn't realize they had it in Florida subsequently finds out, and they might have been the person too. So it's just so bizarre.
It's
thought processes that
it's hard for us to, as rational thinkers, to comprehend the thinking, that so-called thinking that goes behind some of this God belief stuff and the Christian and Muslim faith. All of them really they all make very little sense to us. Although the fundamentalist variety of Christianity is the kind of the issue that we deal with in this country more than any other.
And in today's terms too, Catholicism.
That's true. And there are fundamentalist Catholics.
Papists are, Rick Santorum is a perfect example.
Yes, yeah. And he's got more than one screw loose, I believe.
He's a strange person.
Some of the things he says and some of the things he does just don't make sense at all unless, we were talking about, Doug, you were talking about evidence, having evidence for something. And one of the things that we hear a lot of is that, I think we have a call. We'll see if we have a caller before we get into this. We do have a caller. Go ahead, caller, you're on.
How we doing?
Okay, how about you?
Good, good. A question or two this month, please. Number one, that about 2 months ago, I guess it was.
Is that you, Bob?
Yes, it is.
Oh, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I didn't recognize your voice at first. Sorry about
I've been
that.
away for a while.
Okay,
At least the last week of the month I've been away.
okay.
Anyway, the Supreme Court decision on the Ten Commandments, which seemed to not make anyone happy on either end of the poll, where it was at one time, or sometimes it's allowed and sometimes it isn't. You know what I'm making
Right.
reference to. I would like to get your take on that. What are your thoughts on that decision?
Well, those two decisions, actually.
Well, yeah, right.
And I actually, just as you called, I was starting to give a presentation about the Ten Commandments that I think will offer a solution of sorts for this whole controversy. I don't know if it's a viable solution, but I'm going to toss it out there. So I'll let you ask another question if you have another question or comment. And
Yes, I
then,
do.
Okay, I'll get
do.
back to the Ten Commandments thing when you're finished.
All right. On my thought on that Ten Commandments was it was about as good as it could be expected. In other words, it acknowledged that you can't use it as a religious tool, and yet acknowledges that it's out there, and whether right or wrong, people do use it, okay, in government. So therefore, you have to acknowledge its existence. And I
don't know, Bob. I don't know of a case where it's used in government. I don't know what you mean by that.
Okay, well, by that I'm saying one of the favorites of the This is founded as Christian Nation Boys, which doesn't make much sense, but they used that Supreme Court decision back in the 1890s or something like that.
The Trinity case.
Yeah, where
Yeah.
they actually acknowledge, oh yes, with the help of God, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which isn't exactly true. It's taken out of context. And
Well,
we can
the
talk
bottom-
about that another time. Go
Okay,
ahead.
the bottom line of it is that it says, okay, whether that's right or wrong, whether they should have said something like that is up for grabs, okay? But they're saying, okay, the fact that it's just up somewhere doesn't make it terrible. So
Right.
I'll get off of that, and you may throw that out at a later time.
I have a very good response to that, and I'll give it on our next program.
Okay. My other question, the gentleman in the middle, I've never seen him on the program before. You're a medical doctor, Dr. Brown?
Yes.
Okay. My question would be, why has the medical profession not been a bit more outspoken on some of these so-called faith healers? I mean, you got some of these guys that are running around this country. There's one that runs around European, that runs around Africa, a man named Bongi, who's been proven repeatedly that the things that this guy supposedly does, or cures the blind, et cetera, the man's fake, okay? And my thought would be, why doesn't the medical profession speak out a little more on this? I mean, I see you, and that's the only medical man I've ever heard come out and talk like that.
Well, that's a fun question for me to answer because I've thought about that many times. There probably are a couple answers that I could give you. One is, if you recall, a number of years ago, the medical, and maybe you may not recall, but certainly I do, that there was the medical profession spoke out strongly against chiropractors. That there was no scientific basis for it, that there were no studies to indicate that it was valid, and constantly had a dialogue about trying to educate patients about chiropractic. My own personal opinion is I'm very skeptical of it also, but it went to court, and the chiropractors won, and there was a ruling handed down that the medical profession was not allowed to talk about chiropractors. I think that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that doctors. I guess we have enough trouble with our practices, et cetera, and we don't like to try to take on these kinds of things because they do impinge on religion. And as you know, most people in the United States are very religious. So the doctor doesn't want to be known as anti-religious. Oftentimes, even if he is, he'll say, and the person says, well, I'm praying for you, doctor. He'll say, well, I need all the help I can get. So I think those are some of the answers to that problem. I personally think that all faith healers are charlatans. There have been books written by it. James Randi wrote a book about faith healing, and of course the movie Elmer Gantry was was a good example of the kind of stuff that goes on. And I think it just people don't want to get too involved in it, but I think it's terrible what they do. And I think some of the more recent studies about praying for patients are very bad, very poorly designed, and very harsh, in the sense that I sort of alluded to this with Doug, that the patient's faith comes in question if the cure does not occur by the deity. So those would be some of my answers to your question. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it tells me what you believe, yes. I just, like I say, I feel that they should speak out more when we're talking about guys that have been proven to be quacks. The guy down there in Texas, and
Sure.
in fact, the second one down there, the one that did time for tax evasion, a man named Grant. I don't think he's around anymore, but he was proven to be a fake. This man Bonku, who runs around Africa doing the ridiculous, and yet they just seem like they get a free ride. And I don't.
Well, you know, in a lot of cases, Bob, even after this Bob, not this Bob, in a lot of cases, even after these people are thoroughly debunked, they just continue on as though nothing has happened, and people still give them money, and people still go to them to be cured. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think Benny Hinn was thoroughly exposed about 10 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. On 60 Minutes or sure. One of those programs.
And he's still out there.
And he's still, his revenues dipped for a short time, and they went right back up. In fact, in the end, he probably benefited from the publicity.
See, you're dealing with myths, and myths are hard to dispel. And even though the doctor says, I don't think you should do this, I don't think you should go to this faith healer, you may make your disease worse. If the patient thinks it's going to help them, they're going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I say, I don't like to see people get a free ride when they're out there doing something that they shouldn't be doing.
I agree.
And even the news media, here quite a few years back, I guess now, the guy down in Oklahoma, Roberts, where he came on the air and said that if
he was going to die.
He had a message from God, and if he didn't get $8 million, God was going to snuff him.
Yep.
And now to me, that's either newsworthy or the guy's an absolute quack. Okay?
How about this for newsworthy? He runs a medical school.
Yeah, right. Right.
Loma Linda Medical School is run by the Mormons.
Okay.
It's reassuring.
I mean, that's the kind of stuff you're dealing with. So they've infiltrated, and now they've infiltrated the legitimate journals in medicine with this nonsense about prayer helping people get better or feel better or whatever you want to say. So, I mean, the foxes are in the hen house, and I guess you can say that there's not a lot of courage among doctors, and I agree with you, and I'm sorry for that.
And I think it's also a matter of courage in the news media.
Because
we're talking about, you mentioned the prayer studies, and these so-called studies to prove the effectiveness of prayer have been out there now for about 10 or 15 years. One comes out every maybe 4 or 5 years. And invariably, there's a report in the press, a headline somewhere in the newspaper that says this study shows the effectiveness of prayer, and yet when you read the study itself, as I have done and as Bob has done, you find that there really is no effect. It's usually a very microscopically small statistical anomaly, or they've managed to jiggle around the data to fit an idea that they went into the study with. And this never makes the press. The press never reports this. And there was a study done by the Mayo Clinic, I believe it was a year ago, maybe 2 years
Yeah, it
ago.
wasn't that long ago.
That really, it was the most thorough study to date, and it thoroughly debunked the idea that prayer has any effect. It did not play at all in any of the newspapers, I didn't hear it mentioned in any of the media. All the other ones did when it was misreported that there was an effect of the prayer, but when this major study came out and said, no, there is no effect, it made no appearance at all. Now, we did mention earlier there was another and even larger study that, again, and I can't think of the institution involved, that was just out within a couple of months.
What was it?
And
I think it was a study, it was like a meta-study of multiple studies.
Oh, is that what it was?
And
Okay.
they looked at all of them, and
Okay.
then did an evaluation and found out that there was no relationship between any of this prayer business and healing.
But that study did actually make the newspapers in some places.
Well.
It did make us, it had a small,
A blip.
small blip in the One York newspaper. So
Just to say, parenthetically, I am currently reviewing the book called The God Gene for our next meeting. And I mean, this author has been on Oprah, been on HBO, has been on the Discovery Channel, has been on all the networks, Good Morning America, talking about a God gene. And if you read that book, and if you read it with a medical background, and I'm no geneticist, I don't purport to be, but if you read that book, it's very, very sketchy and very, very tenuous, but yet it's out there that there is a gene to make us believe in God. And so I'm going to talk about that at our next meeting.
Okay. Well, all right. That's like I said, that's all I wanted to run by this month. I'll listen for your views on that constitutional question, Steve.
okay, thank you. Thank you, Bob. And call back if you like.
Thank you.
Good to hear from you as always. And I was starting to talk about the Ten Commandments. If we get another call, Matt, just ask them to hold on for a few minutes or call back. Okay. And one, I see we have a call already. Maybe we'll take it quick if we can.
Okay, I want to put you on hold.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take it quick. Go ahead, caller. You're on. Caller?
Hello.
Hello.
I would like to talk about the media and either about religion or non-religion. I think now I know they didn't do, you're right about the prayer thing. I don't know why they will report one side or the other. But the media has gone fighting tooth and nail as far as I'm concerned into reporting anything religious. I mean, for years.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Yeah. And I think they do it because it has an audience. They're in the business, whether it's a newspaper or a TV program, or a TV network. They're in the business to make money, to make ratings, to attract viewers, and they know that there are a large numbers of religious people in their audience, and they are going to give them stories that they want to hear.
And even now, more of the last couple years, I'd say last couple years, ABC and CBS have done pieces on, like, going over to Jerusalem and then into the Bible lands that they never would have done pieces like that before.
Right.
And even though they didn't come right out and say they could prove or disprove any of it, they still did those pieces just as pieces to attract audiences, whether they believe that or not, which I don't think they do.
Well, it's hard to say. I don't. The TV station is probably like any other workplace. There are people who believe, and there are people who don't believe, and there are a broad spectrum of belief and non-belief in these places. So I think really they're just doing it to appeal to a large number of their viewers or their readers.
Yes, but and also you have to, because these people are they're educated, really high educated, and I see in the colleges they don't
The media you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
They don't preach religion like outright in there, at least in the major networks. Now they're starting. Now I think they're being dishonest to themselves too. If they don't believe it, they shouldn't be putting it on the air.
Well, like I said, I don't know that they don't believe. I think it's what a reporter's personal beliefs are, or a producer or an anchor person, whatever they are. We really have no way of knowing unless they come out and go public with it what their personal beliefs are or non-beliefs. And I don't know that it's fair to say that they shouldn't be putting this stuff on because they don't believe it. I mean, they do, the news media is supposed to do stories, no matter what their personal opinion of it is. Ideally, they're supposed to do stories that are newsworthy. And of course, they make that decision. And what I'm saying is, too often that decision is based more on their own economic benefit than on the actual newsworthiness of the piece that they're doing.
And one last question to you folks, since I got you on the line. John G. Roberts has been nominated to the Supreme Court, and in past years, he would have got a lot stronger. Now it's yet to be seen, but he would have got a lot stronger opposition from the other side. And he's getting a weak opposition of going on the court.
Well, I
don't know if that's good or bad, though.
I think part of that is because we don't know that much about him. And a friend of mine, made this point to me last night, as a matter of fact, that if you go back over the last 25 years or so, for all the Supreme Court nominations made during that time frame, and look at the ones made by Republicans who've invariably been, or for the most part, have been anti-choice, anti-freedom on the abortion issue. And most of the time, these nominees are very reluctant to come out and say, yes, I'm anti-abortion, I'm anti-choice, I'm going to vote against abortion rights whenever it comes up. They don't want to say it. They're very coy, and they don't want to talk about it. They say it's not something they've decided, and of course, everybody knows that's baloney. They've already, they have a view on it one way or the other. And when you have the Democrats nominating someone, they'll usually come around and say, yeah, I'm pro-choice. I'm going to vote to uphold Roe v. Wade. If it comes before me, that's how I'm going to vote. And it's an example of the pro-choice people being open and upfront about what they're doing and what they believe in. And it's another example of the religious conservatives, the Christian right, trying to conceal what they're doing from the American public. And it also indicates that they know, down deep, they know that the American public does not agree with what they want to do, or they'd be shouting it from the rooftops that they're anti-choice. If they thought that's what the majority of the American people wanted, they'd be shouting it instead of trying to conceal it, as John Roberts has done, and also a few previous Republican nominees.
Thomas, Scalia.
Yeah.
Right, and another thing is, when you put these candidates on for life, that gives them a power. They can vote their own conscience. Like Sandra Day O'Connor, and I forget the other one the Republicans put on there, but they were way more left than Ronald Reagan thought they were going to be. Or
well, I don't know.
Bush.
I don't know that Ronald Reagan was all that. It was as conservative as he was cracked up to be on a lot of things. But I don't think that's going to happen again, that somebody's going to be a surprise on the Supreme Court. I think the surprises are going to be few and far between.
Yeah.
Oh, so you think the days with Robert's nomination, he's not a surprise? I don't think he is either. I think he's a hardline conservative.
Right, you're right.
I mean, they're painting him as not dead. They're painting him as we don't know. He's just telling. I actually believe he is.
Exactly. He's afraid to state his views because they're so far out of the mainstream that he knows he's got to try to squeeze in as portraying himself as a moderate in some
right
way.
Down the center.
Well, his wife has a record.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
she has a very definite record, and she has been anti-choice and very active in it for a long time. I would ask him one question if I were on the committee. I would ask him if he's a member of Opus Dei, if you're familiar with that organization.
That's that Catholic secret organization.
Right, which is very much involved in trying to get control of the government by the Catholic Church. I would ask him, is he a member of that? I would like to know that.
That was a scary piece. I don't know if any of it was true, but the media did a piece on that, and the people on that. I can't believe they walk among us, you know what I mean? And some of the practices they were using in there, that's not modern either. That must go back, way back.
Well, I don't know the history of it, but I know that I consider it to be a danger.
Because it's a secret organization, right? You don't say you're an Opus Dei.
Well, maybe if you were asked under oath, you might. I don't know.
Wow.
That would be an interesting question.
That would be an interesting
and
question.
Yeah,
I would like to ask
that's
that question.
something. But you know, the times. So you don't think these guys are that we think they're like that? And they say, oh, they're stealth. They're actually who they say they are.
They're Christian right.
Absolutely.
The whole way. Fundamentalist Christian
This
right.
guy was recommended by Ken Starr. He's a protege of Kenneth Starr. And if you know anything about Kenneth Starr or read about some of his antics, you know what the guy is.
Right, exactly. I do know him.
Yeah.
I don't like him that much, but I do know him.
Yeah.
And what they're saying is, they're saying this Roberts nomination is waiting for Rehnquist to retire. This guy isn't even the one they're really going to put in there.
That's right.
There's a guy named Ludick that they'd like to see in there, or Judge Roy Moore.
Yeah, that would be really bad.
I don't think Moore would have much chance of getting it.
I don't think they can pay.
I would hope not in America.
No.
But you never know.
Thank you, guys.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you, caller. And just hold all the calls now, Matt. I'd like to kind of answer the question that Bob, the previous caller, kind of put to us. And he was talking about the Supreme Court decisions. And one of the things that I've spoken about before on the program, and I've heard Bob speak about it also, is that if you allow Christians to put the Ten Commandments in the courthouses and schools and so forth, then you have to allow everybody else to go in and put their views up as well. And I think it's only fair, and I think it's part of a free society. If you're going to talk about freedom of expression and you're allowing one group to put their views in the courthouse, then you've got to allow every other group.
Absolutely.
And this is my proposal for something that, and I just kind of put this is not etched in stone, pardon the expression. I just put this together last night.
Were you on a mountain when you got this?
No, I was on a small hill,
Any
maybe,
burning
but
bushes around?
no burning bushes. But I would just like to put this forth as something that we would have hanging next to the Ten Commandments in the courthouse. And the first one is, the first commandment talks about having allegiance to God, which is in direct contradiction to our First Amendment. But our first one would be, question with boldness even the existence of a God, because if there be one, he must approve the homage of reason rather than of blindfolded fear. Do not be frightened from this inquiry by any fear of its consequences. If it end in a belief that there is no God, you will find incitements to virtue in the comfort and pleasantness you feel in its exercise, and in the love of others it will procure for you. I don't know if Mr. Jefferson was right about that last phrase. I don't know that it will it will procure love for you, but it's certainly interesting that Thomas Jefferson, in his letter to Peter Carr, and I think Peter Carr was his nephew or his ward, but he actually encouraged this young man to question the existence of God. Number two, also from Thomas Jefferson, history, I believe, furnishes no example of a priest-ridden people maintaining a free civil government. This marks the lowest grade of ignorance of which their civil as well as religious leaders will always avail themselves for their own purposes. And I think this is Jefferson stating very plainly that once religion gets into government, it's a descent into ignorance. Number three, because religious belief or non-belief is such an important part of every person's life, freedom of religion affects every individual. Erecting the wall of separation between church and state, therefore, is absolutely essential in a free society. Notice he says the wall of separation between church and state is absolutely essential in a free society. Thomas Jefferson said that. Jefferson also said, I have recently been examining all the known superstitions of the world and do not find in our particular superstition one redeeming feature. They are all alike, founded upon myths and mythologies. Number five, also Jefferson, life is of no value. One of the commandments says, thou shalt not kill, and we certainly agree with that. But Jefferson would add, life is of no value, but as it brings us gratifications. Among the most valuable of these is rational society. It informs the mind, sweetens the temper, cheers our spirits, and promotes health. In other words, Jefferson was saying extolling the virtues of thinking rationally. Number 6, and we put these on tablets so they kind of will make some of the believers comfortable reading them. Of all the animosities which have existed among mankind, those which are caused by difference of sentiments in religion appear to be the most inveterate and distressing, and ought to most be deprecated. That was George Washington who said that. James Madison gave us our number 7. Strongly guarded as is the separation between religion and government in the Constitution of the United States, the danger of encroachment by ecclesiastical bodies may be illustrated by precedents already furnished in their short history. Madison was warning us against letting religion get a foothold in our government. Madison also gave us number 8, having always regarded the practical distinction between religion and civil government as essential to the purity of both and as guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States, I could not have otherwise discharged my duty on the occasion which presented itself, and that was President Madison explaining his veto of a bill granting public land to a Baptist church in the newly acquired Mississippi Territory. Number 9 is from John Adams. The United States of America have exhibited perhaps the first example of governments erected on the simple principles of nature, and if men are now sufficiently enlightened to disabuse themselves of artifice, imposture, hypocrisy, and superstition, they will consider this event as an error in their history. It will never be pretended that any persons employed in that service had interviews with the gods or were in any degree under the influence of heaven. It will forever be acknowledged that these governments were contrived merely by the use of reason and the senses. In other words, John Adams could not even conceive of someone claiming that America was founded as a Christian nation. He thought the suggestion would be too bizarre for anyone to even seriously consider. And of course, John Adams signed the Treaty of Tripoli, which states that the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. That treaty was passed unanimously, or at least without dissent. I think there were 2 abstentions in June of 1797, and signed by President Adams 3 days later. And it, as John Adams has pointed out, the treaty is, under our Constitution, a treaty signed by the President and ratified by the Senate, is the highest law of our land, and he requested and demanded that everyone obey and live by every article in that treaty. And that's my proposal. And how would you like to see that hanging next to the 10 Commandments in your courthouse? If the 10 Commandments are there, there's no reason why these historical documents cannot be posted right next to it. And if anybody has a reason why it shouldn't be, I'd like to hear from you. And unfortunately, we are just about out of time. What do we have left? About a minute?
30 seconds.
30 seconds, okay, 30 seconds. I'd like to remind everyone, I'd like to thank Dastardly Doug and Dr. Robert Brown for being here once again.
1 minute.
Okay, a minute, okay. Our next live show will be Tuesday, August 23rd. That's the 4th Tuesday of the month. Not the last Tuesday in August. It will be the 4th Tuesday. Okay. And we are out of time, okay? And we'll say good night. Say good night, guys.
Good night.
Thanks very much. You know, this summer, 6.5 million American kids will roll up the sleeping bag and head out to some 10,000 summer camps around the country, and they specialize in everything from soccer to mountain climbing to, yes, basket weaving, but there is one common theme throughout many of these, a presence of God, whether it's grace before dinner or kumbaya around the campfire. But what if you're an atheist? Well, now there's even a camp for those as well. ABC's Andrea Canning joins us with more. Good morning.
Good morning, Bill. It's nice to be back, and yes, there is a camp for everything these days. And we found only 4 camps for kids who don't believe in God. And while only about a quarter of all camps are affiliated with a religion, many of them still incorporate some sort of spirituality. But the camps we saw are what they call worldly and open to any child who doesn't believe.
Heartfelt hellos, emotional goodbyes, roasting marshmallows by the fire, and cooling off in the pool. While Camp Quest may look like your traditional summer camp, it's anything but.
Why'd you come to camp?
Because I really didn't enjoy having to say a million prayers a day at other camps.
Camp Quest is a secular camp for children in families who don't believe in God. For them, it's a haven from the outside world.
I get sometimes pressured at my school, like, why do you not believe in God? But here, they never pressure me or anything.
11-year-old Molly Silverman says it offers acceptance, a place where she's not criticized for refusing to bow her head before a meal. 9-year-old Sarah Hausman struggles with being teased at school.
They think sometimes I'm a devil. I think they're just overreacting when they hear me say, I don't believe in God.
The camp was founded 10 years ago by lawyer and author Edwin Kagan, an atheist with a sense of humor.
We also have critical thinking. We teach science. We teach evolution. We have a very strong emphasis on scientific method.
And we have plenty of free thinkers I'll be telling you about, like Thomas Jefferson.
Kagan also takes a distinct look at American history.
Here at the camp, the kids are each given godless $1 bills that don't have "In God We Trust" printed on the back. That phrase wasn't added until the 1950s.
You are seeing on the news constantly.
Kagan's activist approach is a response to the current debate over the role of religion in public life.
What offends me more about this camp is the fact that they keep teaching the myth of separation between church and state.
An estimated 6 million Americans are atheists or agnostics. They don't believe in God, or they question the existence of God.
If y'all think that y'all are suffering now, you're really in trouble when you get to hell.
Hostility against atheists is still so great, some call going public with their beliefs coming out of the closet. Polls show Americans would choose a president who's gay or lesbian, female or Muslim over an atheist.
Americans tend to view religious faith as the basis for morality. So when someone says they don't have a religious faith or they're an atheist, to many people that's essentially admitting that they don't have any moral values.
So for these children, Camp Quest is a week away from home and a week away from controversy.
There's nothing wrong with the children of Camp Quest. The problem is the bigotry of people who do not understand or who are afraid that they threaten them because of their very existence.
So where are the parents on all this? Well, it's important to mention that these kids are very passionate about what they believe or don't believe in this case. They want people to know that they don't go to an atheist camp because their parents made them. They say they are there because they feel more comfortable in a non-religious setting. And Bill, they just plain like it better.
And how common is this? Just a few in the country, yes?
Just a few in the country, and these kids have really done their homework. They've been to temples, they've been to churches, and they've decided that they can't see a God, they can't touch a God, so therefore they don't believe. And many of them are from mixed families. Mom might be religious, dad might not be, so they've been exposed to both, and they've chosen it on their own.
Interesting. Andrew, thanks so much.
Thank you.